Welcome to ClearPoint Unlocked series. This is the second part of our three-part discussion on embracing accelerating change. The first series we spoke about organisations. This time we're talking about teams. And my name's Bjarne Hansen. I'm a principal consultant at ClearPoint, and today I have with me Lesley. Welcome, Lesley.
Thanks. So hi, I'm Lesley Walmsley. I'm Chief Client Officer for ClearPoint. So I sit across all of our delivery.
Cool.
This is an awesome topic to be talking about.
Yeah, very pertinent. Hey, Lesley, in the first episode we spoke about embracing organisational change. So that was really covering off the vision and how that goes through to the teams at a team level. So obviously things like creating ownership of the strategy through communication and obviously building trust. So trust is two ways. It goes down and then it comes back up.
Sounds like you guys had an awesome chat around strategic level organisational change.
Yep.
It'd be really interesting to talk a little bit about prioritisation and what is a good mechanism for ensuring that we're helping our clients and all of us, even in our own companies as well,
Yep.
think about how we prioritise work and ensuring that we're working on the right thing.
Yep.
What's your thoughts on that, Bjarne?
Yeah, there's a few vectors to that, obviously. One form of it is if you're customer-led, what do the customers want? Is there a demand for something? And then there's obviously the business outcome view of priorities.
Yeah.
I guess one of the important things is obviously having alignment on what is a priority right the way down.
Yes.
Because what we have seen is misalignment. And a good way to address the misalignment is those constant communication channels from the top down and feedback loops from the top back up to ensure alignment. And once again, there's visibility there.
Yeah, I think another good trick that I've seen in a few places and also recommended as well is having a set of guiding principles that helps you with prioritisation, and it just is an easy mechanism for people at all levels to work through those guiding principles and understand whether they should be working on something or, more to the point, not be working on it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so I think that leads probably into a little bit more around how team-based strategy and work planning, et cetera, occurs. And I think one of the things that we see a lot of is a misalignment in the company or a misunderstanding in the company around how they do team-based changes.
Yep.
There's obviously very agile ways of doing team-based work. There's also very waterfall mechanisms. And what's your thoughts on that, Bjarne?
Yeah, I guess it depends on the level of autonomy within the team and whether they can enact a change not in isolation, because no change should be in isolation, but they're responsible for their own piece independently of other teams. But what we see invariably with more waterfall approaches is that there needs to be a mechanism that allows change to cut across the business. And that's, I guess, once again, we're talking about cross-functional teams, although in the agile space, cross-functional teams are encouraged and necessary as well. But I guess, it really does depend on how your organisation is structured to support that change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's no, if I think about some of the scenarios I've dealt with in the past, there isn't just one right way, or you shall be waterfall, you shall be agile. It's you got to figure out where you are in that realm of how you work.
Yep.
And some of the interesting areas that you need to consider when you're trying to figure that out as a company, and being almost deliberate about how you operate. And you're right, to a team level as well, because different teams within a company may operate at different levels.
Yep.
How heavily regulated is the company or is that team?
Yep.
What's the risks associated with change?
Yep.
How are you funded?
Yep.
It's not overly easy to get funding for a piece of work if you haven't done some upfront planning, which is, switching a little bit more back to the waterfall styles, right?
Yeah. It does come down to trust as the philosophy, leadership, being able to trust and empower the teams to do that. But it does really depend on whether the organisation is outcomes focused as opposed to at a leadership level having a preordained view of what something might look like or is needed. Once again, it comes down to this is where we want to go and trusting the teams to do that, because the outcome might be different to what was envisaged, but it's quite often a better outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Giving giving teams the freedom to pivot as needed as new
Yeah.
information comes to light, which is always the case as you work through something, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think as well, when we're talking about waterfall versus agile and touching on your point with the scale and the fact that there's no right or wrong, it's whatever's best in the context of your organisation. I think one of the key points is as well is that it could change depending on the journey. So once again, when we talk about the strategic vision, that there is a pathway to get to that final state, and that does encompass the ways of working and the culture aspect of the teams. One of the things to start out thinking is, well, what would be practical as far as a methodology at a start point? What's right for us now? And you mentioned highly regulated businesses. There's also a view of where you say there's to get funding, you need to understand requirements up front. You need to be pretty clear. That sounds waterfally to me. And if waterfall works in that way, as part of what you need to do, then do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like what you said around actually switch, like you can switch through the piece of work.
Yep.
It's quite interesting when you have, the heavily regulated and, funding only being released based on really minimal contingencies and all the rest of it, that first piece of work tends to be very waterfall-ish. You have a clear set of documents that need to come out at the end of it. And it's great when you see companies who take that approach and basically get sign-off to move forward, but then they move forward to deliver and implement in a more agile fashion. But that agile fashion comes with really good governance and oversight as well, and change management and all that sort of thing, but the teams are enabled to deliver as they need to.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
With the agile bit, I think my thoughts is like generally have a really high level view of what the outcome is, but you don't necessarily know all the detail around it. And you don't necessarily know exactly how you're going to get there, and it's allowing the teams to figure out the detail and figure out the process and approach and the technology and all of that sort of thing along the way, obviously with guidelines and architecture oversight and all of that sort of thing, but enabling them to not necessarily go through that paralysis via analysis the other way around, of having to predetermine all of that before actually starting work, in which case, once they actually start work, quite often more information comes to light and they need to change.
Yeah, I think Agile does lend itself to that flexibility, but there are some really, really key things to understand, and that's how tech can unlock that, because you can be constrained by the tech. For instance, if you've got a monolith system and you're trying to be agile on a monolith, it's not necessarily going to work. It might even slow down the rate of change.
Absolutely.
So you really need to understand it, where you would apply that. If you've got a two-step sort of tech landscape where you've got systems that lend themselves well to discrete decoupled releases, then Agile would be appropriate. But once again, we've seen with some of our customers where they've gone Agile, but there is one monolith in there and they're trying to do Agile on that, where it's like, well, horses for courses. You still need to think about what would be most appropriate at a system level.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I suppose that comes to the level of risk, et cetera, that company can take with regards to pushing stuff out into a monolith, right?
It does, yeah. And then there's like the view of, well, why keep the monolith? And there's a lot of good reasons as to why. Once again, it's the level of investment that the business is prepared to make at that time. But there's also other factors, such as there is a long-term view of retiring the system, but we can't do that now. We just can't. So we just have to stick with it.
Don't have the time or the investment.
But one of the real important things for that team to still do is be able to communicate upwards and be clear that their rate of change might not be as fast as the other teams. And that's important because that sets business expectations, because without that, then the business or the leadership doesn't really know, well, why isn't this team performing the same? They need to know that information so they can plan accordingly and understand and pivot towards that.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. It's interesting how people or how teams communicate that as well with their leadership, with their business-based teams around the process that needs to be gone through.
What we've seen with a lot of customers is actually the adoption of big room and small room planning.
Yes.
So big room and small room planning, once again, the idea is great, but once again, it has to work within the context of your organisation. So you might have a big room planning where there's leadership involved and members of the teams to understand what that vision is for the quarter. And then the teams would go along away and plan in alignment with their sprint planning or however they look to plan. And then the important element that is sometimes missed is feeding, once the planning's done, is feeding back into that small room planning because sometimes that's not done. And that closes that feedback loop.
Yep.
And closing that feedback loop is part of building that trust, is part of the communication exercise to ensure that everybody is aligned in what they're doing.
Yep. And expectations are being managed.
Expectations are being managed, and that's key as well. Yeah.
Do you think, is there any tips or tricks or key things that you think we should be considering before going into that big room planning? Do you think that's a point at which it's good to bring the teams in and kind of just give people an overview of the level of complexity associated with change in the area they're working?
Yeah, I think there's a number of ways to do it. I think as part of the planning exercise and doing something like that, and if we take the example of the agile versus waterfall teams, it might be that the waterfall team comes back after their planning and they're not actually able to deliver to what is expected for that quarter. Yeah. So then that starts to surface as well. One of the other things that's really important with big room planning is that there's involvement across the organisation. Yeah. So you've got sales, you've got product, you've got all the elements of the business there as well, because they need to be across it. They need to have visibility. They need to actually have influence as well over what happens in that space. Quite often, again, we've seen where a cross-functional view of the business isn't necessarily involved.
That whole, just understanding that each team and basically each team is a cog in the wheel, right?
Yeah. 100%.
And you kind of need to understand what your function is. You need to understand the dependencies and the constraints that other cogs in the wheel function under as well. And if you can get that alignment across all the teams and be understanding of and trusting in how and why, etc., they deliver, then it enables, generally faster change and a lot less bumps along on the road as well.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the aim. But once again, with that exercise as well, it's something that evolves as well and matures. You do it once, it might not be as successful as you thought it would be, but be pragmatic about what you want out of it. Like set some outcomes as a business. What do we want to gather out of a change of approach and planning or anything? I mean, the philosophy really is to sort of start small and manage it and be sustainable with any change, whether it's a technology change or a cultural change. It's important to be sustainable about it.
Yeah. And I guess that communication around how you operate, etc., the job's never done, right? Because you change how you operate and other teams change how they operate. Everybody's staying in alignment helps with that and helps achieve success.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
There's the appetite to change as well, which is kind of like quite a topic in itself, isn't it?
Your workforce profile.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because you have challenges with each kind of profile in the workforce, right? The slightly more wise ones tend to be a little bit more resistant to change generally, not in every case. The fresh out of school ones are bull at a gate and don't necessarily understand risk and impacts. Yeah. So it is a consideration, isn't it?
Yeah. It definitely is. I think one of the things that's important as well is, the perceived threat as well, and change.
Oh, yeah.
So obviously someone, for instance, that has got a lot of knowledge within the business and is used to doing things a certain way, the threat of change to them after it being a well-established working process way of delivering can be quite a problem. And I think that comes under that broader change umbrella, creating visibility, understanding where how the part people play in that change, as well as ultimately everybody owning the strategy. And I think if you can create that buy-in, of course, there's going to be casualties of change. That happens. But that is part of change's BAU effectively.
Yeah.
Things happen.
So it's been interesting talking this through around team level strategy and how teams work, and really keen to understand, Bjarne, whether you've got any key takeouts from it.
Yeah, I think it's key with regards to any change. Change isn't going to necessarily happen quickly, or at least if it happens quickly, it might not be as successful as if it's considered. The business that's embarking on the change needs to take a multi-year approach.
Absolutely.
That's really important. Have a long-term vision, but break it down.
Yep.
But if it happens in small chunks, it's more likely to be a success. It's more likely to be sustainable because there's been time for it to be considered. But I guess, once again, the overarching takeaway as well around whatever change it is and how you go about it, there's no right or wrong. There's no right. It always has to be agile. Likewise, it doesn't always have to be waterfall. It's what's appropriate within the context of your business. And I think that is the key message. And, if you're trying to do agile on a monolith system, you're likely to be doing agile for the sake of agile.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But there may be components within that piece of work that you can do in an agile
100%.
Right.
100%.
So it's sort of like somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, there could be a two-step process within the organisation, a two-step way of working.
Yeah.
But once again, it just needs to be considered and slowly tested out.
Yep, and communicated and
Yeah.
all delivered.
And you got to buy into it. You got to have people buying into it.
Absolutely. Awesome.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for the chat today,
Thanks
Lesley.
for
It
the
was
chat.
great for you to come along.